Hello once again. I would like to start today with the word of the Lord as given to the prophet Malachi. We find it in the first chapter, verse 6 and onwards. A son honors his father, and a servant his master. If then I am a father, where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is my fear? Says the Lord of hosts to you, O priests, who despise my name. We have in recent years played down that gift of the Spirit, the fear of the Lord, or holy fear. It breaks through in the way in which we are no longer sensitive to the wish of the Lord in his holy temple. Few of us pause to ask whether he is pleased to hear noise and applause, jokes and laughter in the Sancta Sanctorum, the Devir, the holy place. Are the angels pleased, or are the demons? And how many references will be made this very week to demonic play, as though it were part of life? I mean, indirectly playing to the gallery this time of the enemy. Halloween, almost entering our churches. What's going on? If we feared our King in the holy way that he wishes, we would take off our shoes, for the ground on which we are treading is holy ground, not a place to compromise. In Fatima, before Our Lady appeared, the angel appeared, and what did he do? He taught the children adoration and reparation. He was there adoring the real presence, and also the children were taught a prayer to do the same, which we can freely use. And this element of reparation also enters into our field of study in this course of lectures. We are trying to make up precisely for this lack of honor and glory unto our King in his very house. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, says the Lord. And the Lord indicates that we have made it a den of robbers. In other words, sacrilege. We have taken the holy things. We have taken the holy place. We have made of the place of God a podium for man. How different from what is coming through in the prayer of the ages, the liturgy that formed the saints. I mean, when saints and scholars had nothing to do but receive and study well what was given to them. In the East, they still have that holy fear, taken in a sense to excess, because Holy Communion is rarely received in many places, but nevertheless they have it and put us to shame. They do not applaud in church, and when they have these icons, they are drawn into another world, and they have to do with the Trinity, not with man. The great French Cardinal Jean Danielou, in one of his pithy writings, put it this way: when we have to do with social justice, it is well, but we must not forget that we must face the Blessed Trinity. And on he goes in a tirade, facing this and that issue, but we must face the Blessed Trinity. And on he goes, but we must face the Blessed Trinity. And on he goes, but we must face the Blessed Trinity. And the church is the place where we start doing that. Let us face then the Blessed Trinity, and not the nose and ears of our fellow man. in church, which has become an agora of encounter. In some cultures, one of the high points of the liturgy is, yes, the sign of peace. There are some European areas where it's a free-for-all, a big chit-chat and a buzz at the holiest moment, just before the fraction and the Agnus Dei and the encounter with God. It is interesting to note that permission was given by the Vatican for the church in Zaire, in what has become known as the Rite Zairois, the rite of Zaire, to place the sign of peace earlier. In fact, in a sense, it would be scriptural to have it at the offertory, for there one would be, if one has something against one's brother, as one brings one's gift to the altar, making peace with one's brother. In the Roman Rite it has been retained, although it was questioned where it is, but it is requested that it be not a noisy, adventurous experience of looking for a hand and a face all over church. Just to the right and to the left is sufficient, and nothing going over the top, for it's all in virtue of the encounter with him in peace, and if peace is lost, it's defeating its own end. And by the way, just a parenthesis, but the liturgical sign of peace is very ancient. In our monastery in Italy, we were taught how to do it properly. It's actually hierarchical. It comes from the Lord and goes down, therefore from the main celebrant. He turns first to the right and then to the left, and they pass it on from one to the other, and it goes down to the choir. And the ancient liturgical way of doing it, which we had maintained, is this. The one who's giving it, because he's giving it, places his hands over the shoulder of the other and says Pax Tecum, and the other, because he's receiving it, bows slightly and answers Et cum spiritu tuo, or Amen, or whatever, and passes it then to the one next to him, who makes a slight bow to him. So that's the ancient way, and it does make sense. Way back in time, you might have found that actually there was a kiss of the host, first of all, and that would be then passed on through kissing then the instrument of peace, the Agnus Dei, going around, and they would kiss that. That existed when I was in the Carthusian order initially, and then it was changed to the accolade, the embrace. But anyway, the orientation was the same, starting from the host and coming down. The dignity with which it's done in the monastic world is quite touching. I remember actually in school days, at the age of 17, being very moved by that, the first time I was exposed to the might of Ampleforth Abbey, how this sign of peace was coming down through the choir, and it was something very much felt. This warm embrace in choir was something humano-divine. The warmth of Christ was in it, in the ambit of claiming the promise, where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst. It's one warmth of charity, and therefore it is not unpeaceful. When done properly, it's a great preparation. When done badly, it's a great nuisance. In the French school, there is, at least in the monastic ambit, a great dignity there, and it always has been there. And it owes its force to the great authors and transmitters of the spirituality coming down from Cluny and the others in the line of French Reform way back. It was very much ad gloriam Dei, to the glory of God. And we had the expression in the Premonstratensian Rite with the turning of the whole choir towards the high altar. At certain points we were turned ad majestatem, towards the majesty, and it was a powerful expression. The majesty is what is being served. However, when one faces each other, choir against choir, one feels there more the Christ in the midst element, and that also is very beautiful. I remember being touched by that when I first came across it, how in monastic choirs Christ is in the midst, and we are praising him and worshipping him. And then when it comes to doxology at the end of the Psalms, the two choirs are bending down towards Christ in the centre, as it were. Very powerful. And remember at Ampleforth how the tabernacle there was close to us, because the high altar was still there, and the tabernacle was on it and close to the choir. Very interesting, because it was truly, truly Christ being claimed twice over by the promise that he would be spiritually present, but then also by the real presence in the midst. Now, some of these great authors, we have Dom Guéranger and then later Dom de Latte, these abbots of Solesmes, and they are great writers and have transmitted a whole school of thought. They comment the whole spirituality of St. Benedict and the liturgical life also. We have also our own Dom Columba Marmion. He was abbot of Barredsou in Belgium, but a great author, and liturgy is very much central to his spirituality. How could it but be? Things were done well, and this was their life. So we can't ignore this great block of teaching and spirituality. And it's a great blessing that the Church has in East and West the monastic life. Why? It's not quite so itchy to change, because what has worked will still work. We need to change ourselves. It's too easy to fix the outside and neglect what has to be changed. Many problems are our own problems, not that of the liturgy itself. So this calm reception of the power of what has been perfected over the centuries is a humble attitude towards the mystery that we're celebrating. This new attitude of having to invent something new each time is a very banal and ephemeral way of adoring God and ourselves in the midst. So, what happened? We had this tendency called Gallicanism, where France for a long time was of a certain independent mind with regard to Rome on certain things. He reacted strongly to it, and he, in his person, contains elements of what is referred to by now as ultramontism. It is beyond the mountain, towards Rome that is, that it is only what is happening in Italy and Rome that is actually to be the norm, reacting against Gallicanism, which was the local thing, which didn't want too much interference on some levels. So, this ultramontane attitude does come through, defending the Holy Father and the discipline of Rome. Ultramontanism. However, it's not gone wild, and he's wise in some of the things he comes out with in his final conclusions. So, we have in the 19th century this element of Gallicanism being displaced. Prosper Guéranger was a secular priest who refounded the Benedictine order in France in 1833 at Solesmes. His principal theoretical work was the Institution Liturgique, liturgical institutions. It drew attention to and actually prompted a debate on two principal themes: the centrality of liturgical piety or spirituality in the Christian life, and the importance of liturgical unity, if not uniformity, with Rome. He objected strongly to the fact that the local French liturgies were produced without appropriate papal authorization. An overriding feature of his liturgical theology is precisely this Ultramontanism. So that's the correct form of the word, Ultramontanism. And it was a clear and understandable reaction to the Gallicanism that he so detested. In the course, for instance, of his discussion with the Bishop of Orleans, he suggested that he should send his liturgical books to Rome for approval. If the Holy See approved the Liturgy of Orleans, then it would be able to take its place as an authoritative witness to tradition alongside all the other approved liturgies. In that, he indicates that he sees as supreme the question of authorization by Rome, not the question of antiquity itself, because it was a fairly recent liturgy, that of Orleans. So he's seeing there the centrality of Peter itself. As a principle of liturgical reform, Ultramontanism is actually foreign to liturgical tradition. While the Bishop of Rome certainly has authority to authorize and confirm liturgical reform, we have to ask, is his role to confirm authentic liturgical tradition and developments in conformity with it, or does confirmation by the Bishop of Rome of itself grant authenticity without regard to liturgical tradition? Now, you see, the problem is here, what's going on? Is it the force of tradition, living and ongoing, which has clout, or is it actually the authorization which has that clout? So Guéranger himself appears to tend toward the latter. So that's precisely what we refer to as Ultramontanism and all that goes with it. In other words, Rome has spoken, Rome has spoken. This question of always being faithful to Rome and reacting against this local thing. However, Guéranger did object that the local French liturgies were unfaithful to tradition. He was actively aware of the fundamental role, even in dogma, of the liturgy itself, in the living tradition of the Church. This old principle of lex orandi, lex credendi. The rule, the law of praying is the rule or law of believing. Remember, that's what kept the faith of the East under persecution alive. They could not do much in the way of catechism, of catechizing, of preaching, of publishing, but the liturgy itself in the Eastern Church, there under communism, had its capacity to transmit the faith because of its dense theological content, and it wasn't tampered with. So it matters. We hear things in church, and they have to be correct. They're part of our thought pattern. And attitudes too are picked up, even by children. Attitude is a way of catechizing. If we have a shoddy attitude, a casual one, a banal one, that's what is normal for the children. If they're put in touch with the beyond, even on earth, they get the message loud and clear. So this, combined with his conviction that many of the Gallican liturgies were inspired by Jansenism, led him to formulate a condemnation of what he called the anti-liturgical heresy. That's interesting. So he traces the origins of this heresy from the controversy between Vigilantius and Jerome over the use of candles at the close of the 4th century. Vigilantius and Jerome, that's going way back to the 4th century or so. 5th century. Through the iconoclast heresy of the 8th century, remember 787, we have the last of the 7 great ecumenical councils there, and they did define this element of legitimacy of having representations, because there was a problem with regard to the commandment in the Decalogue, which was a prohibition of having images, but we were allowed to represent, because it was the question of the whole thrust of the incarnation coming in there. The difference, of course, in the East is that to this day they only have two-dimensional ones, whereas we have three-dimensional ones, and in the East also they have to be stylized, not just immediately human. We have the more plastic art and the more direct art. It's real style as corresponding to real life, and we see, for instance, images of a Blessed Lady corresponding to a beautiful lady, whereas in the East they would have something mystical, and they would be not allowed to present something so human. And so he goes on, he sees the same problem with regard to 11th century Eucharistic theology of Béranger of Tours. It was an initial denial of the real presence, and it led also to things going wrong. Tanchelin had to be reacted against St. Norbert. He taught that hosts consecrated by priests in mortal sin were not consecrated, and hence they were desecrated, thrown away. And St. Norbert went around collecting them and honouring them. The doctrine of Wycliffe then is looked at, and he sees there the same problem coming in. Calvin, Luther and Zwingli, all errors with regard to the real presence. So upon these foundations, the Gallican spirit, imbued with the Enlightenment rationalism, in Guéranger's view, rejects Catholic liturgy as foreign to true religion. So what he's saying is this: the fact that there are errors in these schools, Wycliffe, Calvin, Luther and Zwingli, all reflect the centrality of correct liturgy, the correct language, the correct belief. Liturgy is the contact between the church and its God. It's where heaven and earth meet, so it has to be correct, theologically correct. It matters. He has 12 characteristics of liturgical heresy. Look at them briefly. 1. Hatred of tradition in the formulas of divine worship. 2. Substitution of writings from sacred scripture for formulas composed by the Church. 3. The fabrication and introduction of new liturgical formulas. 4. The contradictory principle that operates from an affectation for antiquity, that seeks to reproduce divine worship in its original purity, while spurning development later in liturgical tradition, and yet introducing new elements of incontestably human origin. Fifthly, noting that similar attitudes are to be seen in Protestant liturgical reform, Guéranger prescribes the rationalistic removal of ceremonies and formulas that leads to a loss of the supernatural or mystical element of the liturgy, without regard for its tangible and poetic nature. Now that's something we can bear in mind, because that's actually what we're up against. Everything has to be understood, cerebral, the mind, words, easily understood formulas, poetry out of the window, mysticism even more. Let's get everything just functional and meaningful. But the soul cannot fly. It's just the mind that operates in a rationalistic mode. Where is our poetry in church? Thought is one thing, experience is another. And thought without emotion is dry. Five, or rather sixth, total extinction of the spirit of prayer or unction from the liturgy. Guéranger speaks here of pharisaical coldness and cites the Protestant insistence on the vernacular by way of example. Now, we've had in recent times the question of getting back to an otherness and a nobleness of diction in our liturgy. Some priests did not take it on board easily, failing to understand the depth of the problem. Actually, strangely enough, Protestants quite often go into an otherness of diction when they're ad-libbing in prayer. In Welsh and in English, I've noticed that there is that element of sublime dignity when they address God. It comes instinctively. There's a language they use, formulas which come in automatically. And they have no set prayer except the Our Father. We have got into a notion of ordinariness. We casually address our Heavenly Father in the words that we use over a cup of tea, and also in the same mode. Well, we must remember that that's a new development. The Latin was something which did, in a sense, safeguard that element of fear and trembling. There was an otherness as one approached God with a sacred language. One has to be careful when the whole lot is jettisoned and when the person leading in prayer hasn't perhaps the delicacy that he needs. That's part of the problem. It's not just the question of the words, but the attitude. So combine the correct attitude with words which in themselves are dignified and elevated and slightly above the cup of tea, then it helps a lot. He also sees the Protestant exclusion of the cult of the Blessed Virgin Mary and of the saints as the problem, which actually separates also from tradition, on the grounds that one should ask for one's needs from God alone. That will be his seventh problem. Again, things which are rationalistic, but they creep into the Catholic Church sometimes, especially, for instance, if one has a lot to do with Protestants in the ecumenical sphere. Our Lady is the first to be placed in the ejection seat there of James Bond. Here, Guéranger warns of the transience of the vernacular and of the dangers of using mundane language in worship. Paul VI was keen actually on using what he called il linguaggio del cuore, the language of the heart in prayer. It is actually a help, but it's interesting that in Italy they didn't have that problem of banal Italian. From the beginning, the Italian was very good Italian and very faithful to the Latin. Even now they have not changed the missal. They will eventually probably, but it didn't need to be quite so much because there was not all that much wrong. And so there was a problem in the English-speaking world that it was quite a distance from the language of the Latin that it was supposed to be a translation of, and also sometimes a bit banal. An overriding desire to lessen the burden of the liturgy, by shortening it, that is, would be the ninth problem. The 10th would be the rejection of all things papal or Roman. Rome said it, so don't do it. A consequent Presbyterianism that downplays the ministerial priesthood forms the 11th problem. So this also has crept in. You watch some of the celebrations around there, and there's very little difference sometimes between the lay people and the celebrant. Finally, Guéranger deprecates secular or lay persons assuming authority in liturgical reform, lest the liturgy, and consequently dogma, become an entity limited by the boundaries of a nation or region. So it's not just a human affair. And by the way, there's a slight problem there when it comes to people in a powerful position of practical authority in a liturgical assembly being in practice in the driving seat. I'm referring to musicians. Quite often now a priest is in trouble because he's got to do what he's told by those in liturgical authority. I mean those who are the DJs and those who are saying what's going to happen in the sung parts of the Mass. Quite often they're not even corresponding to the texts of the liturgy itself, and it's quite clear this has come down as a directive now with regard to these new texts. We have to take them, and we can't be singing things which aren't the printed text. One can, for instance, repeat a phrase and so on. That's one thing. It's always been there in polyphonic celebrations. But the other one of having ways of getting the meaning across without the actual words is not. That has been reacted against by the highest authority, and we need to listen to that and not to usually expert Joe Blogs or even Madam Blogs at the organ or in the driving seat saying what is going to be sung today. We may deduce positive principles of liturgical reform from Guéranger's outline. Principles as applicable today as at the time of the Gallican liturgical controversy, namely, to protect the place of non-scriptural texts in the organic whole of liturgy. Now here is the problem, part of it. You see, we are using non-scriptural text when it comes to music, and this musical part of it, I mean the poetry or otherwise that goes with it, is human. Now, therefore, it's not just presumed that anything can come in there. It has to be noble and of liturgical value, truth value. It mustn't be so poetic that it's actually heretical. That can happen if one isn't careful. And therefore, there is a request that it should be authorized. It's not just enough to take on what is catching on. It leads to shoddiness quite often and brings down the liturgy a notch. We're blessed in our time to have also good material coming out. There's a whole wealth of stuff coming from Taizé, which is actually quite beautiful and easy to sing. But there's also very other good stuff around. What is a shame is that we've jettisoned what was of value in the period even before the Council, and certainly after the Council. There were the golden oldies. Well, one hears them rarely nowadays, and they're worth taking up again because they're liturgically dense. We have all those hymns composed or translated by the likes of Father William Faber, and there are also things which we're allowed to use which have come from good translations of ancient Latin hymns. The wealth of things still used in the Anglican Church should be looked at, I think personally, because they're liturgically valuable, noble, and sometimes translations of ancient hymns, and they've not been looked at enough. They've been put out of court, really, by all this new stuff which has come from people who are competent or less competent in composing things which are sometimes too difficult to sing by the congregation and end up being sung by a scholar or, in practice, a folk group, not allowing full participation. So, we need to protect the nature of liturgy as prayer and worship. We need to treasure the role of the communion of saints, our Blessed Virgin and the saints. We need to be aware of the danger of sacrificing liturgy to practicality and speed. In some countries, the dominant factor is that of how long will it take. Is that going to have the last word? If so, it's finished. We need also to be careful of rejecting anything which isn't in understandable mode. There is a freedom in allowing some parts to be done for us. It's not necessarily completely either or, but a scholar still has its role. And even if they're singing in Latin, and if they're singing something which we can't join in because it's too complicated, polyphony, it doesn't mean that it's not got its place. There are parts for them and parts for all, but the parts that they can do are the parts which allow us to flee and fly into mode of prayer and even ecstasy, because if they're singing beautifully, we can be elevated by them, even at quiet moments which otherwise will get more or less sacrificed. I'm talking about the most holy moments, that of Holy Communion, for instance. It's a good place for a scholar to come in and give freedom to the others. That would be good participation, a good scholar, rather than multiplying all kinds of ministers here and there so as to get it over and done with, in inverted commas, as quickly as possible, as though it were an unimportant part, and the big part is yet to come, the notices. So, we need also to respect the particular liturgical roles of all present and the authority of the ordained. In other words, Guéranger would urge respect for the organic nature of liturgy. His adherence to this principle is evident when he writes, "Progress in liturgy must be an enrichment by the acquisition of new forms, rather than by the violent loss of the ancient ones." Violent loss of the ancient ones. Does that sound slightly familiar? Violent! The plethora of persons and projects that comprise the Gallican liturgy, liturgical reforms, that is, provide much by way of negative example from which we can actually learn. We must reject, actually, the French liturgical utopia of the 18th century, even as we rejected some elements of the Roman utopia of the 16th, that is, when there was an itch to make big changes in the breviary which hurt those who were praying it. And of course they themselves backed down and didn't go along with it afterwards. But it was that feeling that one could do anything with even the prayer of the church in the breviary. So, that's the comment of Batifol, this great liturgical expert. I want to stop there, but I'd like to just pause on one element which is personally dear to me, but I'll come back in a few minutes to do that and conclude with it. To conclude, in this wider context of liturgy, I would like to look for a second, by way of finishing off, at something that hit me this very day. It happens to be the day on which I was ordained, and therefore one tends to relive memories. Well, I was on retreat in the week preceding it, in the nearby monastery of Monte Oliveto, the mother house of the Olivetan Benedictines, and therefore plenty of time to be alone with the Lord. And there was a little chapel there where the Blessed Sacrament was, as well as the main abbey church. There was the chapel actually in the infirmary area of the large monastery, where I actually used to go and pray for quite long times there before the tabernacle, which is just in front of me. And on the eve of ordination, I was there looking at the tabernacle with Alpha and Omega written on it, and I was just thinking how the power in that tabernacle is about to break forth. The following day it would come through the hands and mouth of the Archbishop from the upper room, and the Alpha and Omega would speak and empower. And also I was rehearsing chants. We sang the whole Mass there. Every Mass was fully celebrated in song, Gregorian chant, but also I would tend to do the same eventually in the vernacular. And I was going through a few melodies there to be retained and sung well. And I always sing the consecration when celebrating in the vernacular. And therefore this was to be memorized, and it hit me that those few bars would direct the power of God. In chanting the consecration, the voice box would be borrowed by the Son of God, as indeed the voice box of the Archbishop would be borrowed by the Son of God in ordaining the following day, this day. And it hit me. Here man stands before his King. Here God is truly present. Here man disappears, but there is power, and one has to be ready for that power. Not get in the way, but let power reign. All he asks is permission to act. Please. Ubi venit plenitudo temporis. When the fullness of time had come. Lines written in retreat before the Blessed Sacrament on the eve of ordination, adoring and also rehearsing the melodies of the Mass, including those of the consecration itself. "'Tis the eve of the eve of all, and in the blood that washed the world, I stand afresh and wait at the altar of the Lamb. For very God, of very God, awaits behind heaven's gate. The thunder of the Word, once heard of yore, by prophet and by sage, by priest and king, awaits behind this yet sealed door, o'er which my angel friend soft spreads his wing. Tomorrow this thy hand, thy voice, thine all, O small and hid Jehovah, shall me reach from all the eras gone, and one vast call, heard well by waiting cherubs, shall hence teach the molecules of time to move along a path here traced by but a bar of song.